this one being ED&I in the office, equity, diversity and inclusion. Our panel is going to be sharing experiences on how we can improve equity, diversity and inclusivity in the workplace, specifically for females. So please give our panel a warm welcome as I introduce them. So we have Dr. Audrey Tang, author, chartered psychologist and mental health broadcaster; Sheryl Miller, global diversity, equity and inclusion consultant; Ritika, Wadhwa, sorry pronunciation, CEO and founder of Prabhaav Global; and Alex Jensen, CEO of National Express UK, Ireland and Germany. Thank you. Oh, we're in order. Love that. Hi. We'll do introductions first. So if we go, Audrey.
Hello. My name's Audrey and I'm a chartered psychologist and author. I talk a lot about mental health in the workplace. My PhD was based in well-being in the workplace, and that's what my books are on as well. And what I'm also trying to do at the moment, it says broadcaster up there. I run a little studio. We do a little mental health show and an arts and well-being show, and we're really trying to reclaim that mental health media space, which has become a little bit diluted these days. So that's my little mission.
Thanks, Audrey. Hi, my name is Sheryl Miller. I am a global D&I consultant. I'm actually a chartered accountant by profession. I sometimes say a recovering chartered accountant. And for the last kind of 10, 15 years, I've been working in the space of transformation and change. So going into organisations, typically working with leadership teams, and increasingly more so now working with employee networks and training up their leaders and kind of helping them to create inclusive spaces. So that's me.
Hi, Sheryl. Hi, everyone. The formal introduction is that I'm obviously Ritika Wadhwa, and I could talk about the fact that I'm a leadership fellow at Windsor Castle, a trustee, a board member, etc., etc. But I'm going to put all of that to the side, and I'm going to introduce myself in 4 words: female, ethnic minority, immigrant, CEO and founder. That's my introduction in a nutshell. CEO and founder of Prabhaav Global. Prabhaav means impact in Hindi. And what I do through my organization is use the transformative power of cultural intelligence for impactful leadership.
I'm so glad you went before me. So I wish I had 4 words to describe myself, but my name's Alex Jensen. I'm the CEO of National Express. And I guess I've been in business for most of my career, and the single defining thing that motivates me is purpose and connecting people to that purpose. And so to do that, it's so critical that you create an environment where everybody can thrive, and diversity and inclusion is right at the heart of that.
Yeah. Wow, thank you. We have questions, but I kind of want to break the ice a bit fast, talking on ED&I. A lot of people maybe necessarily don't actually fully understand necessarily what it means or how it works. I just want to ask open question to all of you. What does equity, diversity and inclusion mean to you specifically?
I guess I'll start because interestingly, when I was in my career, especially my finance career, I didn't really focus on the barriers and the discrimination and things like that I faced. I kind of was just very much head down, get the job done. And for a lot of my career, so I qualified with EY, so one of the big 4. So a lot of my career was kind of going into spaces and rooms where, you know, whether it was a management conference of 500, 600 people, and I would literally be the only person, the only black person, often the only like female kind of younger person. But I didn't really focus on it in my career. I then wrote a book a few years later as I was stepping out of corporate. And it was then that I started to really delve into what is the science of, what is it that makes people thrive in an organisation, regardless of their background. You know, so how do you get ahead? How do you feel like you can be yourself and still have opportunity doing that? And as a result of that, organisations started to ask me to come and talk to them. So there is just something about, for me, inclusion is I can turn up to work and just be myself. And secondly, I can turn up to work, be myself, and still get promoted, right? Because you can't always do the third one. So that, for me, sums it up.
I'd also like to add, as a psychologist, I listen to a lot of experiences. And one of the most important things that I've seen is someone will share their experience and the immediate reaction from others, even if they are of the same gender, same age, same ethnicity and so on, will be, oh, well, that wasn't my experience. Mm-hmm. It's very much about recognizing, even if that is not your experience, do not invalidate somebody else's experience. And it's about being able to hold that space for yourself as well as for other people. That, to me, is inclusivity.
Yeah. Both of you, yeah.
So for me, diversity, equity, inclusion sits very close to my heart because I grew up in India in a very patriarchal society. So of course, being a woman was what singled me out really from my lived experience. And then when I came to the UK, I had other tags of fresh off the boat, funny accent, difficult name, didn't have my networks, etc., woman of color, which I'd never heard of. So all of these minute lived experiences, and I say minute because they add up eventually, got me to the point where it's now about just being who we are instead of trying to fit in. So very much echoing the thoughts of my panelist here to go, inclusion really is to be able to show up as we are in whichever gender we want to, in whatever ability we want to, in any capacity that we want to, and not only just accept it, but thrive because of those unique differences and perspectives that we bring to the table from our experience.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, building on all of that, because I agree with all of that, although I haven't got all of your experiences, I guess the angles that I have coming into this, just so you know a bit more about me. Obviously, I am female. I've worked for two organisations in my life mainly, BP and now National Express, and both of them are quite traditionally male-dominated. And so the experience of how you actually create that environment for everybody to flourish has been really relevant, I think, in those organisations. It's about understanding those structural biases as well as, you know, the personal impact people have. But another angle into this is I've spent many, many years in China. So I started studying Chinese when I was about 15. And so I spent many years there leading businesses as well. And again, you know, the diversity and inclusion impact of Chinese people in the organisations I was running, and the idea that they should rise through the ranks just to run China rather than the idea that actually they should be running maybe the global company. So really understanding how I could create that environment. And then finally, I'm a trustee for Mind, and I have been for about 7 years. And so, you know, the idea of what is going on in people's sort of mental well-being and how do you actually create that broader system and structure so that actually people can thrive, not just from a paper, you know, career point of view, but actually also mind, body and soul.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. How would you all say that we as people ensure that women in the office, in the corporate world, in their businesses feel respected and valued for their contributions regardless of their background, regardless of their identity, regardless of anything else, just simply for what they do?
I'll start with this, which hopefully echoes what everyone's been saying. And it's not just a case of invite us to the table, but listen to us. Yeah. It's about actually wanting to learn from other people. It doesn't matter who those other people are, but wanting to learn from them, not simply seeing it as a target setting, gotta tick that box. And that's the problem. When there's so many targets that come in very, very quickly, employers, organizations, they want to just go, yeah, I've done it. But the problem is no one's growing, no one's learning, no one's thriving. Mm-hmm. And so it really is about seeing, I think, equality, diversity, inclusivity as an evolution rather than a target-setting exercise.
Yeah, I would just add a couple of things. I think there are ways that sometimes, even as women, we sort of undermine our own position in the office in terms of our own value and worth. And one of them is, and this is something I've called myself in the past, when we call ourselves work wives, and there are people that we maybe look after, when we take care of, we make sure that they go and have lunch and whatever. And I'm not saying don't be caring and that you have to become, something else, but there is, I think sometimes we undermine the purpose of why we are in those offices, why we are in those roles, and we, default to these stereotypes that are so ingrained and so socialized for us in terms of us being the caring ones, the ones that are taking the notes, the ones that are doing all of that practical stuff. And sometimes I would say is just as women, just step back from it, just step away from the social organising and all of that stuff. So that's the first thing I'd say. And then secondly, in a very practical way, there's a really good example of Barack Obama when he first got into office. His top aides, 2/3 were men. And the women started to kind of complain that they were often getting talked over and interrupted. We know actually that women tend to get interrupted more. So women interrupt women and men interrupt women. So one of the things they started was called an amplification strategy. So in meetings, if a woman were to say something, and assuming it was a valid point, another woman would speak up and echo what that woman was saying and give her the credit for that point. So a very practical way of actually amplifying the voices of other women, right? And this is one of the ways I think that we show solidarity as women and make sure that their voices are heard. So amplifying other women is my big takeaway.
Hashtag women empowering women. Right? I want to hone in on the word respect. So when I joined one of my previous organizations, I got an email from my boss and pretty much made me feel really, really disrespected to the point where I thought, right, I can't work with this organization. Until I met someone within the organization and within the cultural intelligence framework and said that what respect means to me might be very different from what it means to you, right? And how people respect each other could be done in very different ways. Now, within the cultural intelligence work I do, linked very clearly to the DEI framework, cultural intelligence is about being able to work effectively with people that are different from us. And by that, what we mean is that what is acceptable and familiar to me might not be acceptable and familiar to you, but that doesn't make it wrong. So someone's way of showing respect might very much be about being direct, sending an email asking exactly what the task needs to be done. Whereas some others' strategy might be indirect. That's what they're used to. So I think, again, when we are on the receiving end, there's two ways to look at that. One is obviously, is this person meaning to disrespect us? How can we come from a place of curiosity rather than judgment? And secondly, of course, if that still doesn't sit well with you, how are we going to approach that? How are we going to resolve that? So I think respect means different things to different people, and what respect means to us needs to be very clear. What our values are and how we feel respected needs to be very clear, while we keep an open mind to how people show their respect towards us as well.
Yeah, I think I'm actually going to build on that, amplify what you just said, because I was going to go into respect as well. But I guess 3 things for me. First of all, it is about leadership from the top, because without that, you're relying on every single individual to do the right thing, and not all of them maybe prioritise it in the same way. And so I think leadership from the top, and then the leader holding people to account all the way through the organisation is critical. The second thing for me is about having a really clear set of a clear culture and set of behaviours that go with this. That's where I would put something like respect in there, with an explanation of what do we mean by that. And that gives you the opportunity to engage with, well, if respect is one of your cultural values, what do we mean by that? We don't mean don't email late at night. What we do mean is listening. Can we all agree that listening is a good way of showing respect? Does anyone not agree that we should listen? And if you've got someone who says, no, I think you shouldn't listen to other people, then you know you've got a fundamental problem because someone doesn't agree with your core value. And so I think really having a dialogue about what do these words mean. I see a lot of organisations having them on the website and then not really following through. And this really came home to me when my daughter years ago went to a new school, and she hated her old school. And she went to this new school And she said, after an hour, she watched an assembly and she said, this is the school I want to be in. And I said, why? And she said, well, they've got she checked out the values on the website at age 12. And she said, they've got exactly the same values, including respect and individual first. But in my other school, my headmaster would chew people out in the middle of assembly and tell people off. In this school, somebody did something and he said something like, hey, my two friends over there, let's have a little chat later, and made it into was respectful. And she said, so I could see he was treating them as individuals and with respect. And just because of that, she decided to go to that school. So my third point is then just checking that those things that you're standing for are actually being experienced by people. So are you checking that your culture is there? Are you checking people feel respected and included and so on? So I think those are the things. They're easy to say, but it's how you actually implement them.
Yeah.
That's key.
Do you mind if I add to that? Because I think that's a really good point. It is about, yes, having your values, but in training I used to do an exercise where I would ask people to write down what the values said on the website of that organisation. They write them down. Then I'd ask them, well, what do you think the values actually are in practice? And it would be very, very different. And in positive psychology, Martin Seligman has something called the Values in Action test. And it is about recognising about 24 different values. It includes things like loyalty, bravery, temperance, a whole range of things. But you are really encouraged to think about what they look like in action. How does it seem to you? Not just because actually, exactly as you've said, respect could look different to different people. Kindness can look different to different people. And so if you know what those values mean to you and what they look like, and then you can at least explain it if somebody asks you about it as well. But if you are interested in that particular test, it's on the Pennsylvania University website. You do need to sign up to them because they use it for research, but they don't spam you, I promise. But it's called the Values in Action test.
Thank you. So you're talking about that in terms of like having, say, initiatives on the website and not following through. What, in all of your opinions, then can be some practical steps that can be taken to promote these opportunities in the workplace for career advancement or just for inclusivity, in your opinion?
Should we go in a different order? Do you want to go first?
No particular order.
I'm happy to go. So, I mean, there are so many things that you can do, right? I mean, for me, it's obviously about having a strategy around it. It's about targeting your effort to where the problem areas might be. And so I think quite often organisations will say, oh, on average, we're this. But it's understanding where that representation is and where it isn't. But I have an example. When I was running a business in China, so I was running 1,000 petrol stations in China. And when I first got there, so it's about understanding the barriers that are stopping people, right? And then being really specific about it. So I was asking my team, how many women are running petrol stations? And I was thinking it probably wouldn't be high. And I was quite surprised it was 25%. So I was really quite impressed. And I said, well, that's great. So how many area managers do we have? And it was area managers run the petrol station, so they maybe run 15 each. And they said, oh, we've got 0 women. And I said, well, how? If you've got 20, I would have expected like 7% or something. I don't know, 0. And they said, well, it's because they don't like the responsibility, that old classic chestnut. And I said, but it's quite a big responsibility to run a petrol station, right? You've got, potential robberies, you've got highly flammable liquids, you've got, legal accountability, you've got 25 staff. It's a lot of responsibility. Are you sure that's the reason? And they said, yeah, we're doing loads and loads of work, find your voice, how to take responsibility. And no one's stepping forward. I said, yeah, but they've got response. Do you want to go and ask again? So they did. They went and asked again. And you know what the answer was? They couldn't drive. So because they couldn't drive, they could only go from home to the site. That was easy on the bus. But because they couldn't drive, they couldn't get from, 10 or 15 different places. And so they obviously continued to do, courses like Find Your Voice and stuff, but they added driving lessons to the list of courses. And within 3 years, they had a 20 to 30% pull through. And so I think it's about really targeting your focus and actually really, truly understanding the barriers that are stopping people, because you might be surprised.
Yeah. Sure.
Okay. So I've been quite fortunate in my career that I've had, people have talked about mentors and sponsors. And so I won't kind of labour that point. But I have definitely been on the receiving end of, a tap on the shoulder to say, there is a role coming up, we think you would be appropriate for that role, etc., etc., and almost like had the job spec created for me, right? And there's something about how we do that as women, which hopefully we'll get into in this conversation. But I think what we're starting to learn now is because of biases and all sorts of things like that, it's actually quite rare that that's going to happen to people that aren't in the majority. So if you are female, particularly if you're a female of colour, actually, it's quite rare that will happen. So what some organisations are doing now, some organisations are calling it the tap on the shoulder programme, and they're starting to tap everybody on the shoulder, right? So everybody comes to say 2 years into a role, there's a really conscious conversation that says, what's your next move? What are you looking for? Rather than it just being, such and such is a good guy, they're going to get a tap on the shoulder and all of a sudden they appear in this role that was never advertised. So I'd say there's something about how do you formalise, really formalise once somebody's partway through a role, a conscious conversation about what is your next development move.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of two words in this work, and that is data and dialogue. So data, what is the organisation? And some of our panels before us have talked about this. So what is the data saying? What are the conversations and having dialogue with people within the organisation? What's that saying? So that needs to drive the strategy, obviously. Then, of course, when the strategy is clear, what are the interventions and what are the activities that come along the way to make sure that we are doing what is meant to be done in order to be inclusive. The other point I want to make is around it being a two-way street. So I have worked with loads of organizations that do have diversity hiring. So they do hire diverse candidates at various levels within the organization, especially in international markets as well. They bring people from countries like China or India and get them to countries like UK, US, working at high levels, working at senior leadership positions. And what a lot of organizations do with diversity hiring is that they train the diverse hires. This is how you would work in our country. This is how you work in our culture. This is how you would work within the culture of the organization if you're looking at just domestic culture, right? And so that's great. How do I order food at a pub? Or how do I fit myself within the British culture, etc.? What about the other way? And this is where a lot of organizations are falling, where you've got an organization that is thriving in Germany. You're bringing people from around the world to work in your German office, but you're not training your German leaders to work with these people. So of course it falls flat. It's got to be everyone's responsibility. It has to be a two-way street. And the responsibility should never always sit with the underrepresented or the marginalized communities.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the big points in...
I quite agree. And as a trainer, which is what I do, I go into organisations. One of the things that we always see, and I see it in terms of well-being, but I think the point can transfer to inclusivity as well, is that a lot of training, a lot of that is focused on the individual and how do you get the organisation to recognise you actually need a systemic change rather than actually it's the individual's issue. Mm-hmm. And one analogy I've been using, which seems to hit home whenever I use it, so please, if you like it, share it. If I were to walk onto this stage and trip over and there was a loose bit of carpeting, do you think Millennium Point would say, well, next time, we're going to train you to walk around that properly. Next time, we're going to train you to get up nicely. Next time, they're going to fix it. They're going to fix the problem. Mm-hmm. And that is what we need to do when it comes to making systemic change. There is an individual responsibility. Yes, training can make a difference. But if you train someone and they go back into the narrative and the situation that is already problematic, not a lot else is going to happen. We need to take almost that health and safety look. And it's something that's just coming up in psychology at the moment. And it's Karen Scholes is looking at it, if you want the name. But it's just worth recognising if we take a health and safety approach, we are more likely to make a systemic change rather than always make it the individual's responsibility.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting as well, because I think specifically like with ED&I and like corporate world or big organizations, the people that are from diverse backgrounds and fit one of those categories are the ones that like want to get involved and do it. But how do we then tailor for the people that's actually say meant for, that aren't really that bothered about it because it's particularly maybe not an actual KPI that's not actually checked off? They do the training, the 20-minute training where they watch it, but then they don't really do much else. Like, if you could have a conversation with those people that don't see the importance of EDI in the corporate world or the office, what would you say to them and how would you get them to change?
I think that is actually the problem, is the fact is getting them to the training in the first place, because in anything, it's the person who needs it most who sits there and goes, well, it's nothing to do with me, is it? Whereas the rest of us who probably are so overworked anyway and doing loads and loads of things, we go and it's another extra thing that we have to put onto our list. Sometimes it is about having a quiet word. Sometimes it is about making certain things mandatory. Sometimes it is about really calling out unconscious bias. And if you are concerned about calling people out, a little trick I like using is not necessarily going straight in with, sorry, what was that again? Is actually to say, oh, I didn't catch that. Could you repeat that, please? And that's a good start, because that forces somebody to think about it, and it's not challenging. It's not nasty. So it's a simple, I just misheard you. What did you say? Could you repeat it? And I find that's a good way of starting some dialogue.
Yeah, I love this question. So the reason I've called my organization Prabhaav, which means impact, is because for someone like me, intent, well, for anyone, intent is invisible, right? And so what we see is impact, which is really the behaviors that we see from leaders around us. So when I work with organizations, very large global organizations, the starting point of my training is the why, right? It's very much about, let's use the example of couch to 5K. If I'm sitting on my couch and I've decided I want to run 5 kilometers within a month, if I'm not clear about why I need to do that, whether that's for my mental well-being, whether that's because I want to get healthy, whether I want to lose weight, whatever the reason be, if I'm not clear about why I need to get up from the couch and run 5K, I'm not going to be persistent. It's not comfortable for me to do that. And in order to sit with the discomfort, I need to be very motivated by my why. So when I work with leaders in boardrooms across the country, it starts with the CQ drive, which is the why. Let's be honest. Be honest to yourself. You're not answerable to me. You're not answerable to anyone. As a leader, be honest with yourself. What is your why? If your why is ROI, great. Sure. Let's accept that. And let's go from that. In order for you to be innovative, productive, you need diversity around the table. You need inclusion around the table. Because if you don't do it, your competitors will. Mm-hmm. Right? And so if that's heart or head leaders, I call them, let's figure out whether they're heart leaders or head leaders. The heart leaders get convinced by dialogue. The head leaders will convince by data. Either way, it's what's their why that will keep them persistent. It's getting to the point at the end of the day that we want the impact. So how are we going to drive that outcome by understanding what is the drive for the leader that we're trying to work with and drive that outcome through that?
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, I'm just going to build on what Ritika said really quickly, because I'm not sure there's long enough to debate how you get people on side in terms of D&I in the workplace. But building on what Ritika said, with the leadership teams, absolutely always starts with the why, or the business case, as I sometimes call it, putting my accountant's hat on. So there's always two aspects to ED&I, and the first one is the moral case, as in it's the right thing to do, right? It's just fair. And then the second thing is there's a business case, it's the ROI, the hard kind of pounds, the diversity brings innovation and creativity and all of that kind of thing. But I think for individuals that, are kind of like lower down in the organisation, colleagues and co-workers that maybe aren't on the bus, that's a tricky one in terms of how you do that, because you can very quickly make people feel quite defensive, when things are called out, etc. If we use that, albeit, there are ways, in quite a skillful way, of challenging behaviour. And I love what you were saying, Audrey, just as an example. But one of the things, in terms of when I'm approaching diversity and inclusion in an organisation where maybe people aren't on the bus, there's something about you've got to get people to see that there is benefit for them personally. So for me, inclusion, and I said at the top of this around, I can come into work and be myself. Everybody wants that. everybody, even straight white men, right, want to be able to come to work and just be themselves. And so often if you start there and you're kind of almost all going on that journey of we want to create an inclusive environment, that tends to be a really good place to start. And I'll just leave it there because I could go on this topic forever.
I think we all could, Alex.
Well, I think it's all been said, actually. It's about head and heart. It's about the case for change, making individual. And I guess the implication of all of that is it does take time. Organisations have to set aside time to do this and have these conversations, because it's not just something that gets cascaded down through targets. To really understand how you internalise the why, what it means for you, you need to be able to brainstorm it with people, explore it, hear what other people, how they're creating the case for change. And so I think has been my lesson, I suppose, as I've kind of led and participated in these journeys of increasing diversity and inclusion, is, and I've not always done it well at all, because sometimes I've been too busy to do it. And when I've been too busy to do it, that's what's tripped me up. You have to make time. You have to believe it really matters.
Yeah. On that as well, I'm kind of intrigued because I have this debate or question a lot because I'm very involved in the ED&I space as well. But say ED&I think a lot of companies, just in my opinion, focus a lot, maybe because it's easy on diverse recruitment, getting in new hires from diverse backgrounds, from the protected characteristics. But then when it comes to the people that already work in their firms and promotions now come up, it's not the same kind of like push. So what would you say are some initiative strategies or whatever that companies can focus on? Because it's kind of two streams, getting people in, but then also promoting them through the business so that at the top, it's not just straight white males.
Yeah, maybe I start on this one. So what I've seen work quite successfully is, and I know targets are actually quite controversial, but by setting targets and not insisting on it, but by setting targets, I think what's also good practice is sort of rules of the road, that you have diverse recruiting panels, that you look at your the agencies you might be using, you look at the language, there are all sorts of things all along the way in every single HR process. What's the data around who's getting promoted and who's getting the opportunity to present and who's getting the opportunity for that special project. I mean, these are all the things that you need to do. But I think the rules of the road, where it says, and if you've done all of that and the women still aren't being represented, then you don't necessarily force it, but you ask why, and you learn the lesson of that. So if the woman is, not in a long list, you can certainly set targets around that. And you might even set targets on a short list. And if the woman isn't successful, or the group that you're the diverse group that you're promoting and trying to represent, why not then? And then you learn from that and you say, because they were underqualified. Okay, so what do we do to make sure they're overqualified next time? So I think this is quite a long cycle of continuous improvement, in my view, that is needed for this. I can't actually remember what the question was, but hopefully I answered. What was the question?
You
did answer, don't worry.
Yeah, the thing about, how we promote and pull people up through the ranks, right? One of the roles that I did in my career, I was, the official title was Executive Support Manager. Some people called it bag carrier, right? Basically, I was like almost like, sort of assisting the CEO of quite a large business. And so I used to go into a lot of board meetings. I used to present business cases and all of that kind of thing to board meetings, into boards anyway. But that role really taught me a lot about how decisions are made in terms of, like you were saying, who gets put forward for what project, who gets put forward for what role, and the conversations that happen in those rooms. And I think somebody on a panel earlier today said about the importance of people speaking up for you when you are not in the room is absolutely critical. I can't stress that enough. It doesn't matter how good you are in your role, especially if you're a woman of colour, you have got to have somebody in that room speaking up for you. So there's something about, so in terms of empowerment for us, there is something about how do we create those relationships? How do you get very, very good at creating relationships in the workplace? But the thing that I say to the leadership teams is when those conversations are being had, this is where bravery and courageous leadership comes into play, because, they're kind of sitting around the table of everyone that maybe looks really similar to them. And it takes a lot of courage actually for them to speak up for somebody that doesn't look like the people in the room, right? Mm-hmm. So as organisations, there is a lot more rigour and structure and evidential-based decision-making around who gets put forward for what role, who gets nominated for what project, because that is where these decisions are being made. That's why you're not seeing the progression up through the ranks. It's these behind closed doors conversations. The reality is, and apologies to my HR colleagues, but it's not a meritocracy. Is why a lot of these decisions are being made. So anything that we can do to make those processes have more rigour, more structure, be based on evidence, that's what gets my vote.
Yeah.
Sorry, do you mind me just add to what Sheryl was saying very, very quickly? It's also about having female mentors, because the dynamic is very different when you've got a male mentor and a young female university student or something like that. It gets just that little bit awkward, and no one may be putting that or thinking that. It may not even be conscious, but it can be very, very different, because the question of, can we talk about this afterwards? Can we do it over a drink? Can we do it over coffee? It can get quite problematic. So having more female mentors is a really helpful thing, especially for getting more women into various industries.
Yeah.
I want to share a tried and tested way of making this work, and hearing my colleagues and adding to that, really. Back to the why. So why are we trying to do what we're trying to do? Let's be clear about the diversity, inclusion why. Then what do we know? So what is the data saying to us? Why are we not promoting women? Why are we not promoting diversity, etc.? So what is the data saying? The why, the what, then the how. How do we plan? How do we make sure we have policies and procedures in place? And at that point, I really want to mention the system, because if you are asking for an MBA, does that job need an MBA? And really, is our society geared up to make sure that the single mothers, that the black children that come up through the system are able to get an MBA when you ask for an MBA, right? So what systems are in place right now that are barriers to hiring, retaining, and ensuring that the talent pipeline moves along the way? And so it's the why, the what, the how, and the actual getting up from the couch and running, right? The action. What are you doing to hold yourself accountable to actionable change? And that isn't just words. So there's a foolproof framework there in making it happen.
Yeah, thank you for that. Just a final question for you. I want to ask, in the ED&I space, like we mentioned, how important and why are allies so important, whether that be male allies for women or white allies for people of diverse backgrounds? Like, why is it so important that they're also in the conversations, if not, like what Sheryl said, having those conversations when you're not in the room? Can we touch on the why that is so important?
For me, the most important thing is, if you're going to call yourself an ally, actually be an ally. Yeah. So what I mean by that is, it's very easy for women, and I've seen it happen, and people have explained it, that it's happened to them as well. They may have gone through very different experiences, and they have fought their way through, and they have succeeded, and that's wonderful. But then when it comes to feeding that down to younger women starting, it becomes a bit, get over it. I dealt with it. It was fine. And the one thing I always say to people, just because you tolerated something, it doesn't mean it was the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I might have summed it up in the last point. But in terms of allyship and advocacy, I just think, when those opportunities come up, just think of that person. Think of that other person that doesn't have those opportunities. Basically, I think that's the main thing that allies can do. In terms of the mentoring and sponsorship, I have had male mentors, who weren't the same race as me. So I've had straight white men as mentors and sponsors. And to be honest, I think in terms of my career, I probably wouldn't be where I was if it wasn't for straight white men that have opened doors for me, genuinely, and spoken up for me in rooms when I wasn't there, and I've had things fed back to me. So sometimes I kind of a slightly different view maybe to Audrey. I sort of just say get the help and the allyship and the advocacy from wherever you can get it from, because you might be in an organisation where there just aren't the senior female women that can do that mentoring. So that would be my thing. But yeah, as allies, just being really brave and courageous, and whether it means risking your own solidarity with the in-group, because that is what's sometimes at risk, actually, is solidarity with the in-group. So being courageous to actually speak out for somebody that isn't in the in-group.
Yeah, thank you.
Sort of taking on from Sheryl there, being courageous. So I'm currently mentoring a very senior leader within the London Fire Brigade, right? And so we talk about allyship, and I want to use the word performative ally. It's very easy right now for people to be performative allies. If you genuinely want to be a genuine ally for the cause, then it's got to become personal. Mm-hmm. I haven't personally met anyone that, unless it gets personal, dig deep on your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, someone that's gone through an experience that was highly painful for you to watch. Now, empathy, bring that empathy in, and it has to come from within, from the gut, for you to be able to be courageous and stand up as an ally, for you to be able to traverse the path that is of discomfort, for you to be able to actually, with that solidarity group, right, work there. So you've got to find the personal why before you go on that journey, and then stay the path.
Yeah. Final thoughts, Alex?
I realise we've run out of time, so I'll just say one thing, which is, if you're not an ally, what are you?
Thank you very much. Okay.